Charlie Kirk rose as the loudest voice of Gen Z conservatism, pushing hard on immigration, crime, and culture wars. But in a twist of irony, he was killed by another young white man with a gun he so strongly defended. Now people are asking, do his words echo America's darker past? Stick around, because we're breaking down Charlie Kirk's rise, his controversies, and why some say his legacy is more complicated than it looks. Early life and rise. Charles James Kirk was born on October 14, 1993 in Arlington Heights, a northwest suburb of Chicago, Illinois. He grew up in nearby Prospect Heights, where his father, Robert W. Kirk, worked as an architect, and his mother, Kimberly, first held a job at the Chicago Mercantile Exchange before later becoming a mental health counselor. The family leaned toward moderate Republican politics, and Kirk's early years reflected a fairly traditional suburban upbringing. From a young age, he was deeply involved in community life. Church activities, volunteering, and the Boy Scouts of America all played a role, with Kirk eventually earning the rank of Eagle Scout. His devout Christian faith was a cornerstone of his identity and later a central part of his public persona and politics, often referenced in speeches and interviews to emphasize his values and morality stance. Those experiences shaped his sense of discipline and public service. Yet by middle school and high school, his interests began shifting toward economics and political thought. He later credited conservative economist Milton Friedman as a key influence, an early sign of the ideological path he might pursue. Kirk attended Wheeling High School, and it was here that his involvement in politics became more visible. During his junior year in 2010, he volunteered for Illinois Republican Mark Kirk's U.S. Senate campaign, an experience that gave him his first taste of organized politics. Around the same time, he wrote an essay criticizing what he described as liberal bias in school textbooks. The essay drew attention and earned him local media coverage, marking his first exposure as a young conservative voice. After graduating in 2012, Kirk briefly enrolled at Harper College, a community college near Chicago, but he dropped out soon after, deciding against completing a 4-year degree. That decision, unconventional at the time, later became part of his public identity, framing him as someone who challenged traditional expectations of higher education while building a career in activism. The turning point came in May 2012, when Kirk spoke at Benedictine University during a Youth Empowerment Day event. There, he met Bill Montgomery, a conservative activist and marketing professional. Montgomery encouraged Kirk to take his passion for politics into full-time activism. Just 1 month after finishing high school, Kirk and Montgomery co-founded Turning Point USA, a nonprofit dedicated to promoting conservative ideas on college campuses. Financial support soon followed. At the 2012 Republican National Convention, Kirk connected with Wyoming investor and philanthropist Foster Friess. Friess became an early donor and later joined TPUSA's advisory council, providing credibility and resources to the fledgling organization. Other contributions arrived in subsequent years, including donations from the Rauner Family Foundation, linked to then Illinois Governor Bruce Rauner, in 2014 and 2015. These funds allowed TPUSA to expand beyond the limits of student-run groups and establish a more formal structure. Kirk gained fame by aggressively using social media and debate tactics, including methods like gish galloping, to overwhelm his debate opponents and make his ideological points resonate with younger audiences by presenting an image of an undefeatable debater. Growth came quickly. What began as a handful of campus events turned into a nationwide network of chapters. TPUSA expanded its programming, building a media footprint and rolling out initiatives such as the Professor Watchlist in 2016. This public database named professors accused of promoting left-leaning or anti-American views. Supporters called it accountability for ideological bias in education, while critics, including academic freedom groups, denounced it as harassment and blacklisting. Regardless of perspective, the project pushed TPUSA further into national debates about free speech and campus politics. By 2020, TPUSA's financial disclosures reported revenues of about $39.2 million. The rapid rise brought both visibility and scrutiny. Investigative reporting questioned aspects of the group's financial practices, including transparency in audits and donations, and noted that Kirk's salary had grown significantly as the organization scaled. These reports highlighted tensions between TPUSA's grassroots image and its growing status as a multi-million-dollar nonprofit with national reach. As TPUSA grew, its finances and Kirk's leadership drew media scrutiny, reflecting the challenges of balancing activism and organizational scale. Kirk's willingness to cherry-pick statistics or use selective data in public presentations also drew criticism, highlighting his focus on winning arguments instead of always presenting fully verified information. Alongside organizational growth, Kirk was also building his personal brand. In 2016, he published Time for a Turning Point, setting a course toward free markets and limited government for future generations. Released by Post Hill Press, the book outlined his early vision for youth-driven conservatism, free markets, and limited government. The publication helped raise his national profile, positioning him as more than just a campus activist. At the same time, Kirk invested heavily in media platforms. The Charlie Kirk Show, his podcast and later syndicated program, became one of his primary tools for connecting with audiences. Regular appearances on conservative television and radio networks reinforced his message, while TPUSA events drew thousands of students and featured prominent Republican speakers. By his mid-20s, Kirk was recognized as one of the most visible conservative figures of his generation, bridging grassroots activism, media influence, and national political networks. Unlike many other conservative commentators like Steven Crowder, Kirk's rapid rise was fueled by his strategic use of social media debates, targeted messaging, and an ability to craft viral content that appealed to Gen Z audiences, capitalizing on the appetite for owning the libs on campuses. Kirk's meteoric rise was definitely due to his mastery of debate and social media that set him apart. Using rapid-fire arguments, selective statistics, and techniques like the Gish Gallop, he could overwhelm opponents in real time, making them appear unprepared or uninformed. Even failed moments like the Cambridge debate incident amplified his visibility, reinforcing his brand as a relentless and combative thinker. Turning Point USA, a chronological overview. As Kirk's presence grew through podcasts, TV appearances, and student rallies, the spotlight shifted toward the project that would define his career, Turning Point USA. What began as a modest campus effort quickly evolved into one of the most visible conservative youth movements in the country. Turning Point USA's mission was clear: to promote free markets and limited government among young people. From the start, its strategy centered on campus organizing. Kirk and his team argued that conservative voices were being sidelined in higher education, and TPUSA aimed to change that by planting a strong, recognizable presence on college grounds. By the mid-2010s, TPUSA claimed hundreds of chapters nationwide. Volunteers distributed flyers, hosted debates, and recruited peers, all while ensuring their presence was impossible to ignore. In 2015, the organization launched its Student Action Summit in Florida, which grew into its flagship annual event. Thousands of students attended, alongside major Republican figures, from members of Congress to Fox News personalities. Eventually, even Donald Trump and Senator Ted Cruz joined the speaker list, signaling that TPUSA's influence had moved from campus activism to the center of conservative politics. However, expansion did not stop at colleges. TPUSA launched Turning Point Academy for high school outreach and created Turning Point Action in 2019 to move directly into political advocacy. Alongside these, the organization boosted its media operations with professional productions, social campaigns, and, of course, Kirk's own broadcasting platforms. The strategy broadened the audience far beyond students, pulling TPUSA into national conservative media ecosystems. But as the organization grew, so did the scrutiny. Outlets like ProPublica and The New Yorker questioned TPUSA's internal finances, donor transparency, and Kirk's rising salary as the revenues surged. Critics argued that the group's rapid spread sometimes sacrificed meaningful student engagement for flashy growth. These investigations showed cracks in the polished image, raising questions about priorities and accountability. Kirk's core views and notable moments. As the media attention grew, Kirk stepped out from being just the head of a student group and into the spotlight of America's culture wars. His position on immigration, crime, race, and identity became central to his public brand, with statements that gained him loyal supporters, fierce critics, and a steady stream of headlines.
There's nothing wrong with mass incarceration. In fact, we need more prisoners in this country, not less prisoners, and we let prisoners out of jail way too quickly in America. But isn't it racist to have mass incarceration?
You know what? I don't think it's racist because I've been black for 28 years and I've yet to go to jail or prison.
But come on, the justice system is rigged against black people. You're a white supremacist.
You know what? I still don't know how white supremacy would benefit me, but I love it here in America.
Amen. God bless you, man. Thank you.
Kirk linked immigration and crime, advocating strict border enforcement and tying rising urban violence to progressive policies, a stance praised by his supporters but criticized for oversimplifying complex social issues. Kirk was also a vocal defender of gun rights, championing the Second Amendment and gun ownership as essential to American freedom, which became a major pillar of his identity among conservative youth. His public appearances defined his brand among young conservatives. At TPUSA events and on social media, this stance reinforced his image as a principled, activist-minded leader willing to challenge restrictions and defend constitutional rights.
An illegal alien in the state of Arizona is twice as likely to commit a crime versus a natural-born citizen. Fact. 90% of all heroin and fentanyl come across the southern border. Fact. Over 10,000 kids are illegally sex trafficked across the southern border every single year. Fact. We have 56,000 illegal immigrants in our federal prison system. Fact. Where he says we have a moral and a constitutional and a traditional and a historical right to self-defense against invasion. And this is an invasion, Megan, and we can dive into it. So I want your audience to make sure they understand the sophistication and the sinister nature of what's happening on the southern border, which could only best be compared to the modern equivalent of the North Atlantic slave trade.
In one striking remark, he said, "America does not need more visas for people from India," sparking backlash from critics who saw the statement as targeting specific immigrant groups.
Yeah, I mean, if you're in this country illegally, you should be deported.
Okay.
And we should also restrict the amount of legal immigrants coming into this country as well.
Okay.
But the illegal problem is a much bigger problem, right? It's a full-out invasion. We have 15,000 people a day marching into our country. We don't know who they are. Terrorist watch lists. They're killing people every day. Lake and Riley, another 16-year-old in Texas was just murdered over the weekend by an illegal.
Immigration without assimilation is an invasion, he added, making assimilation the dividing line between what he considered acceptable and not acceptable immigration. Kirk frames racial inequalities as matters of personal responsibility, rather than systemic barriers, rejecting the notion of systemic racism, a position that divides opinion among supporters and critics alike. His views on gender were also controversial. He frequently criticized policies protecting transgender women in sports or programs for cisgender women, framing them as unfair advantages, which drew criticism from LGBTQIA+ and feminist groups.
Great Society program, woke ideology, destruction of our family. They want to play the race card all the time. Who's been in charge of black cities the last 60 years? It's not rural farmers in western Kansas or Missouri. Instead, it's been white liberals. It's been a project of the white liberal and for the white liberal. And it's hyper-academic ideology, abstractions. And here's the one thing I would say, which is, try to be real. This is one of the reasons why I think that Black America is going to have a conservative renaissance at some point, is that these ideas require you at times to go through to get a PhD. They're so insane.
This places him firmly in the culture war battles, where he clashes with progressive policies on race, gender, LGBTQ+ rights, schools, and religion, often insisting that America has already made substantial progress and should resist what he describes as radical overreach. His public profile grew rapidly during the 2016 election, when he and TPUSA mobilized students to back Donald Trump, presenting the contest as a defining fight for American values.
Yeah, first of all, welcome to the conservative movement. I don't think you should introduce yourself just based on your sexual attractions.
No, I agree. I like
because that's not who you are.
I like to be thought of as a person, and
for sure, you are a complete human being, and I'm sure you treat people well, and you're studying something. So I want to get away with this idea that you're gay anything. I just think that we have gone a long way in the negative direction in this country, where we act as if the most important part of your identity is what you do in the bedroom.
By 2020, Kirk was no longer a campus activist. He was a national figure, one who publicly questioned ballot integrity in key states. PolitiFact and Reuters flagged his claims as misleading, yet he maintained that his goal was transparency, not fraud accusation. Critics countered that his words fueled misinformation on a mass scale, and then came COVID-19.
I do not know when they actually will lift these mask mandates. I mean, I could see them just going in perpetuity.
I agree.
Kirk openly opposed lockdowns, mask mandates, and vaccine requirements, insisting they violate personal liberty and expanded government power. Health experts disputed him sharply, warning that his rhetoric could undermine public safety. Still, Kirk presented his defiance as part of a broader defense of freedom, controversies, and criticism. The same defiant streak carried over into other battles, and soon Kirk's career became defined as much by controversy as by activism. One of the earliest flashpoints came in 2016, when he launched the Professor Watchlist through Turning Point USA, a public database naming college professors accused of spreading left-leaning or anti-American views. While Kirk framed it as transparency, educators and civil liberties groups blasted it as an intimidation tool that endangered academic freedom, with some professors arguing it painted them as enemies of conservative students. This, coupled with how Kirk constructed his arguments, has drawn a lot of criticism from academics who claim he twisted the facts to suit his political narratives. Kirk's stance on immigration has been just as divisive. He strongly opposed amnesty for undocumented immigrants, championed strict border control, and insisted that these measures uphold the rule of law, a position cheered by conservative audiences but denounced by immigration advocates as punitive and exclusionary. His rhetoric on crime mirrors this tough approach. He tied urban violence to progressive policy failures, advocating for harsher policing and stricter sentencing. Many critics say that this message carried coded racial undertones. Race-related debates have further amplified the backlash. Kirk is a vocal critic of critical race theory, reparations, and movements like Black Lives Matter, calling them divisive and un-American. Yet the pushback hasn't only come from the left. Even within conservative circles, some accuse him of prioritizing media spectacle over substantive policy, turning complex issues into viral sound bites that favor attention over depth. Kirk's media strategy of traveling to colleges and debating unprepared students was in large part what led to his notoriety. TPUSA itself has been embroiled in heated campus incidents, lawsuits, and high-profile protests, such as Kirk's 2024 threat of legal action against the University of Memphis after demonstrations involving Kyle Rittenhouse. These confrontations underline TPUSA's combative approach to activism and the legal risks that come with it. In the press, portrayals of Kirk reflect America's ideological split. Mainstream outlets often cast him as a provocateur who thrives on cultural conflict, while conservative media hails him as a defender of free speech and a vital counterweight to liberal dominance on campuses. Taken together, Kirk's controversies revealed not just the battles he picked, but also the symbolic role he played in America's ongoing culture wars, where every statement, protest, or lawsuit feeds into a narrative of confrontation and divide. The comparisons. These portrayals show Kirk not only as a political actor, but as a symbol in America's culture war, and it's here that comparisons to the past emerge, with critics noting echoes of older far-right rhetoric in his sharp stances on immigration, crime, and culture. Critics and commentators have often noted that political rhetoric, past and present, sometimes carries familiar themes, prompting comparisons that are more interpretive than accusatory. Crucially, these comparisons are not made to equate him with extremist groups, but rather to highlight how language and framing can evoke echoes of the past. The goal, critics argue, is to encourage a closer look at how his messaging fits into America's long-running debates over identity, law, and national values. Critics counter that dismissing systemic barriers while emphasizing individual responsibility echoes past tendencies to overlook structural inequities, reinforcing divides by minimizing lived experiences and material realities of marginalized groups. Observers also stress that Kirk's methods differ fundamentally from those of historical extremist groups. Where groups in the past relied on violence and intimidation, Kirk's activism is channeled through campus events, social media, and political advocacy. His style was confrontational and provocative, but it was bound by law and electoral politics. Even within conservative circles, he was often described as a showman of ideas, someone who thrives on cultural debates rather than direct coercion. Crime is another focal point where comparisons arise. Critics note that past rhetoric often tied criminality explicitly to minority groups, while Kirk framed it through policy arguments, emphasizing urban violence and the role of illegal immigration in certain offenses. His speeches frequently cite statistics and emphasize stronger law enforcement, which supporters interpret as data-driven solutions. Though opponents argue, the framing still carries undertones that resonate with older narratives and often uses cherry-picked or inaccurate data. His life and death. But beyond the debates over faith and ideology, Kirk's own story took a dramatic turn, shifting from the life of a rising conservative figure to the shocking and untimely death that stunned both supporters and critics alike. Charlie Kirk, before his death, was living in the Phoenix, Arizona area, where Turning Point USA is headquartered. He maintained a public activist lifestyle, speaking at conferences, hosting media events, and running his podcast show while keeping many aspects of his personal life more private. He married Erica Francevey in 2021, and they had 2 young children, a daughter, 3 years old, and a son, 1 year old. But then, tragedy struck on September 10, 2025. At just 31 years old, Kirk was fatally shot in the neck during a Turning Point USA event at Utah Valley University in Orem, part of his American Comeback Tour. The event, outdoors, was drawing about 3,000 people. The shooter reportedly fired from a rooftop approximately 142 yards away. Kirk was taken to Timpanogos Regional Hospital, but pronounced dead later that day. The suspect, 22-year-old Tyler James Robinson, was arrested 2 days later. Investigators recovered physical evidence, including a rifle and other items tied to the shooting. While saddened, many critics noted that the political reaction to his death, particularly statements from the sitting president, was starkly different from responses to the deaths of Democrats under politically motivated violence, raising questions about partisan attention to such tragedies. Financially, before his death, Kirk had amassed an estimated net worth of around $12 million. This wealth came from multiple income streams: his leadership at TPUSA, media work, books, speaking engagements, appearances, and conservative donor support. His compensation at TPUSA also reportedly grew significantly over time. Supporters often pointed to Kirk's energy and clarity, his ability to connect with younger audiences, especially on campuses and in social media, and his role in mobilizing youth via Turning Point Academy, his podcast, and national events. They admired how he turned media reach into political influence. Critics, however, argued his style leaned heavily on showmanship and frequent public visibility, with some claiming that his controversial rhetoric sometimes overshadowed substantive policy work. Following his death, his wife Erica confirmed that Turning Point USA will continue with the fall campus tour and key events like America Fest, signaling that the movement he built is not ending with his life. With Kirk gone, observers say his legacy now involves both what he built, the networks, the media influence, the movement among young conservatives, and what his death underscores: debates about political violence, public safety at political events, ideological polarization, and the lasting question of how public figures navigate both message and risk. Charlie Kirk's story is about the divides running through America today. To some, he gave conservatives a voice on campuses. To others, he amplified rhetoric that felt uncomfortably familiar from a darker past. So here's the question: when the language of history starts echoing in our politics, do we shrug it off as business as usual or treat it as some kind of warning? And in a world where political violence can come from the left and the right, what do activists have to do to make sure they're safe while still getting their messages out? Share your thoughts below, and don't forget to subscribe for more. Thanks for watching.